Yes, it'll give me a second.
Ourselves.
You can, yep, that'll help too.
Or not, or leave them unmuted because we get to do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, there you go. We can all do the Pledge of Allegiance. Not on mute would be appropriate.
There we go. Since Jim's here, we'll let Jim lead it.
I'll tee you up.
All right, Mr. Bernard, take it away, sir.
I don't think Jim's actually there.
He's not. All right, here we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America, and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I didn't want you to see me eating a pork chop.
Oh. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's been having a splendid start to their August. Was a little surprised by the rain this morning, but it was kind of refreshing. So I think everyone can see everyone, so I think we can skip with official introductions.
This up later.
Mayor, I think it is good practice to note who's in the attendance tonight, as well as who you can see, if that's okay.
Nope. If you have that list.
I do have that list. We have Dana Webb currently from Oregon City, Jamie Huff from Happy Valley, Jeff Goodman, Councilor Mayor Reyes from Tualatin, and I'll just note that Tualatin only has one member and no designated alternate. If Councilor Morrison doesn't show up, I'm happy to move Councilor Reyes into the meeting, but she would not be a voting member per the bylaws. Mark Ottman from Wilsonville, Mike Besner, Rick Cook from Stafford area, and then Will Farley. I'll also note too that we're expecting, and I don't see them yet, two guests would be Representative Prusak and Representative Meek are potentially going to join as distinguished guests as they have in the past on 205 topics. So if you see them in the group in the future, and I'm sorry if I'm missing you now, I just don't want it to be a surprise.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Housekeeping, approval of the July 2nd, 2020 C4 meeting. Anyone want to throw out a?
I'll move to approve the notes.
One update, please. I was in attendance at that meeting. We could add that to the minutes, so as amended.
Got it.
Perfect. So we have a motion. Is there a second? Thank you, Stan. Mayor Sandy with the second. Any further discussion or changes? All right. Sign of hands. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Minutes pass.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you all. So you'll see on the agenda we have more than an hour to talk exclusively about I-205, and we have quite a few updates to share, both on the funding front as well as tolling front. So for the first 40 minutes, ODOT is here to give us an update and an overview of things. Then we have 15 minutes where I'll give you an update on what we've been doing on funding, and then another 15 minutes, and Jamie Stasny will be sharing an update on tolling and the NEPA comment period. So with that, we are very fortunate to have Mandy Putney here with us from ODOT to give us an update on things and answer any questions you have. And if you haven't heard, just last week, Mandy was selected as ODOT's new I-205 project director. It's a new position. It'll be housed within the agency's urban mobility office. And Mandy, she's been with ODOT for the past 3.5 years and has been very involved in a lot of the work they've been doing around the mega projects, including 205, the Rose Quarter, 217, Boone Bridge, Metro's T2020 work. So she's already very steeped in all of this knowledge, and we're really fortunate to have her coming over to lead the 205 efforts. And I believe she officially starts September 1st, so we're fortunate to have her here a little early. Perhaps it's her initial debut when it comes to 205. So she'll give us a short presentation, and we'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end for any questions you have, as I'm sure there will be many. So with that, Mandy, take it away.
Sure, great. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you all for having me. It is my first presentation in this new role, and I'm happy to do it with stakeholders that are so invested in the project. I'm happy to meet those of you that I haven't met yet. I know many of you that I'm seeing around this virtual table, and I look forward to working with all of you as we move forward to get this important project built. I do have just a few slides tonight and some updates, and then would really like the time to listen to you and your comments. I'm not sure that I will be able to answer every single one of your questions, but I can definitely take them down and get back to you if they're not questions I can answer on the spot. You can go on to the next slide. So as was mentioned, the 205 project is now part of the Urban Mobility Office. As I was just starting at ODOT almost 4 years ago, 205 was moving from under my group, the planning side of the house, down to project delivery. So it's very exciting to now come back full circle and to be more involved with it again. The Urban Mobility Office also houses the Rose Quarter Improvement Project, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project, and the toll program. Tonight, I'm really going to focus on talking about the I-205 improvements, but did want you to understand that this is very much connected to ODOT's effort to improve mobility in the Portland metro region, and that there is a lot of attention, both internally and externally, on moving all of these projects forward. This timeline shows what we're thinking right now about how each of these projects will continue to move forward. There are lots of caveats for still building up the tolling program, and that these are estimates for tolling at this time. And then also I need to note that the 205 construction phase is dependent upon finding construction funds. We'll move on to the next slide. As you know, the 205 Stafford Road to Oregon 213 project will bring seismic resiliency and operational improvements for the corridor. One element of this project that has been fully funded and is currently underway is the installation of real-time signs. These signs will display recommended speeds based on the actual conditions of the corridor, show travel times to get to key destinations, and provide information to travelers about crashes and current time road conditions. This work is currently underway, and we expect it to be complete this fall. Head to the next slide. There's two other aspects of the project, and this might be an updated visual to some of you. We have been tweaking the parameters of the phases. We used to say there was kind of a bridge phase and a widening phase. We now have phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is shown in this graphic in yellow, and phase 2 in blue. Phase 1 would be improving the Abernathy Bridge, seismic improvements, as well as adding an additional lane. It also now includes adding the 3rd north and southbound lane to 10th Street, as well as Oregon 43 interchange improvements and roundabout, extending the northbound auxiliary lane from Oregon 99E to Oregon 213, widening the Main Street Bridge, removing the Broadway bridges, replacing the West A and Sunset bridges. And then phase 2 would be seismically enhancing the bridges on I-205 between 10th Street and Stafford Road, adding the southbound and northbound lane on 205, again in that same vicinity, 10th Street to Stafford Road. all of these corridor improvements will provide additional throughput for passenger vehicles and freight, and would provide the opportunity for future bus rapid transit if desired. Currently, pre-COVID, there were about 6 3/4 hours of congestion, and with the project, we'd see a reduction of this to 2 hours after both phases are complete. We're currently looking at a cost estimate for phase 1 of about 400 to 430 million, and phase 2, 160 to 190 million. So the total cost for this part of this project from 560 to 620 million. While, as I mentioned earlier, the design phase is fully funded for both phase 1 and phase 2. We're approaching 60% design for phase 1 right now, and we'll be at 60% design for phase 2 by the end of the year. The completion of the project really is contingent upon identifying construction funding. Upon identification of the funds, the project can proceed to construction within 18 to 24 months. This time will allow for the completion of final design and engineering. And we are continuing to pursue all funding options for the corridor, both federal, state, local, and then there is the separate effort underway to evaluate tolling as an option for improving or providing funding for this project as well. So those really are the slides that I brought tonight. I'm happy to answer questions on this information, and also would really appreciate the chance to hear your perspectives, your concerns, and any input that you want to provide to me while I'm here tonight.
Thanks. I'm happy to facilitate the robust hand-raising exercise that's about to begin. And we'll start with Councilor Heisey.
Beat everyone to it. Thanks for the update. I appreciate that. I just had a question about the addition of bus rapid transit. Is the plan to, in the design, include that on bus on shoulder, or how are you moving forward with accommodating bus rapid transit?
Sure. I mean, the bridge would be able to, would have the capacity in terms of be able to handle the weight of bus rapid transit. The shoulders of the corridor would also be available for bus on shoulder. The project itself does not include those elements. It just will be able to accommodate that in the future if needed.
So, and this has been a longstanding concern for Milwaukee, is we really want to see this happen. Is there anything that you see in the project that would preclude bus rapid transit? If the design is not specifically with that in mind, it just will allow that. I get a little concerned that there might be a difference between those two things, if you see what I mean.
No, I don't think there's anything that would preclude bus rapid transit or bus on shoulder. And so if there's a transit plan in place to move forward with those aspects that would fit for the corridor and the region, this corridor, once it's built, would be able to accommodate that.
Okay, thanks.
I have Chair Bernard next, followed by Mr. Keith.
Mandy, I've got to say that is the shortest presentation, and one that is the first time I've ever heard ODOT say anything other than funding with tolling. I heard you say other alternatives and a separate one, a study of tolling. I did have the opportunity to speak to the director of ODOT the other day, and the chair of the Transportation Committee, and suggested that if the governor is interested, and I'd like to see a committee formed to look at funding of the 205. His concern, of course, is, if you don't know already, I'm sure you do, revenues are down 40%. And that's a big hit with the lack of travel and tax revenue on gas tax. So it's a $2 billion shortfall already, and that does not include the Columbia River crossing. So I wouldn't hold your breath on any of this, but thank you for the very short presentation.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, I was asked just to come to do a short update, and my goal and why I'm here in this position is to try to get this project built. And so we are looking at all options for funding, and right now tolling is in that mix. And I would say everything's on the table. I will let you know that the Region 1 Act, the Area Commission on Transportation, just met earlier this week. They did support a letter that was sent yesterday to the Transportation Commission recommending that the commission form a committee to look at funding. And I think you will hear probably more about that on your agenda later. So that was part of my other earlier job that I'm trying to transition out of. But there are other folks that are interested in that same sort of committee and approach.
Mr. Keith, followed by Commissioner Savas, and then Councilor Lewis.
Mandy, thank you for the presentation. Yeah, you know what? We've had the tolling group present one time already, and we're having them present to the Stafford Hamlet on next Tuesday. And I'm a little bit confused about the connection between what you're describing and what they're describing as they're going through the NEPA process. I mean, from where I sit, there seems to be a disconnect between what you're doing and they're doing. So could you help bridge the gap there as to, are you working together or not? Or when do you coordinate and when do you don't coordinate? Because it just seems like they're on a separate track and I don't see the connection.
Sure. So the toll program is being stood up to look at tolling and following a robust feasibility analysis that happened over the course of a year and a half, 2018, 2019. There were two spots that were identified to look at tolling, one on I-5 and one on 205, and the location on 205 was on or around the Abernathy Bridge. And so that work is continuing to look at tolling as a way both to manage congestion and to potentially raise revenue. And so that is what that NEPA, that environmental process, is focused on. And that timing and the potential there of funding is still to be determined. And so in the meantime, ODOT has continued to move forward to seek all the funding that we can to move the 205 improvements project, the capital project, forward. We've worked closely with the Transportation Commission to continue with design and move that schedule forward as we're continuing to figure out funding for construction. So the points of overlap in the future are still to be determined based on the analysis that comes from the toll team, as well as our ability to look into other funding options for the 205 corridor.
If I can follow up, thank you for that answer. But one of the things you're doing right now for the NEPA process is getting public input. Is there another public input process in what you're working on that would allow the community to express their opinions?
Yes, there's a website, and we go back to the last slide. It's on that slide for the project. There are email updates that go out and have been going out about the real-time signs. And so at this point, it's a little bit more information sharing in terms of the signs, not as much requests for input, but there always is the ability for people to submit their questions and their comments on the project, and those will all be responded to.
If I could follow up again, so do you have a NEPA process you're going to have to go through too, or that's already been done, or?
There was a NEPA process for the 205 improvements. It was done under a classification called categorical exclusion. That FHWA document was signed at the end of 2018. And so the NEPA process for 205 is done, which has allowed us to move forward with more advanced design.
Okay.
I will include that link in the chat room here in a moment. I have Commissioner Savas next, followed by Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Trent.
Yeah, thank you, Mandy, for mentioning the letter to the OTC. We're kind of fortunate to have Mandy on board. We've been able, those of us on R1 Act have been able to work with Mandy in that capacity for a long time, and she'll be a great addition on this project. So we're fortunate to have her. Mandy, you mentioned the bus rapid transit. That's exciting. Can you tell me, would that actually start at the town center and go all the way to Tualatin, Wilsonville, or is there any designs on that as of yet, as far as concepts?
No, I mean, that would really be a regional conversation working with the transit providers to determine if and when and how that comes about. So there aren't currently plans as part of this project specifically to add bus rapid transit to the corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. Mandy, the thing that I think we are not talking enough about is how this fits in system-wide, in particular in that the goal of using funds would not only be to build the improvements and also to manage congestion, but thirdly, we would need to follow the practice of creating alternatives, bus, other mobility, so that we are not only ensuring that people have choices, but also helping manage diversion. So I'm wondering, with the two-phased approach, how you're approaching those more people-focused kind of studies, in particular diversion, and if that's unified between the two phases, or if you have separate process, and how you will be able to approach communities that are going to be directly impacted by the diversion.
This project, we think, will really improve the diversion that's currently happening, because it will add the additional lane, improve the interchanges, and make travel in this part of the corridor less of a bottleneck. I think perhaps some of your comments might be related to the toll analysis, and it's good timing to ask those questions now. There is a comment period that's open. The NEPA has just been kicked off for the toll analysis on 205. So again, like that work is separate from the actual capital project planning.
All right, our next list is Mayor Axelrod, followed by Representative Meek, and then Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. Hi, Mandy.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Haven't met you yet, but it would be nice to sit down in not too distant future and kind of look at local stuff and the impacts, that we're seeing in our local communities around the area. A few things in a very broad sense. The rapid bus on transit, while I understand there's space for it, I think it would be a good idea to at least have some sort of concepts, finance, understanding of what it would cost. So as we're looking to financing, it seems to me there'd be a lot of opportunity to leverage the project and maybe open up other funding opportunities if we're actually addressing some of our critical regional transportation needs. So I'd be curious about, what you might have to say about that, or what we might consider on that in the future. Also, as you probably know, in the original concept for the I-5 project up in Portland and the 205 and how it was originally laid out, 205 was supposed to be done before the I-5 project in terms of how they, best work together regionally. And of course, as you probably know, 205 got dropped out in that 2017 package, and yet now we're looking at the I-5 project being delayed for some time. So is there going to be any effort, or do you have any comment about how those funds might be diverted, at least to some degree, to get a shovel-ready project going, and then work on funding maybe to go back and fill in the gap on the I-5, if that might be an opportunity? That's a question I have. One thing that's not come up, well, two other items to touch base on. Westland's water comes from our South Fork Water Board on the Clackamas, and all Westland's water comes on a pipe over the bridge. And there's probably, we have great interest maybe in updating the seismic capacity and capability and resiliency of that line. But I haven't heard anything about it integrated in the design, and I just want to make sure that ODOT has kind of factored that in. And then finally, the bike ped situation. I know there's nothing planned for actually up on the bridge, and regional plans are looking at how are bikes going to cross and what's the connection going to be. Is it going to be Oregon City over to Westland from the south, or more from the east in that Gladstone area? But it seems to me as those considerations go around too, is it feasible to hang this on the new Abernathy Bridge? It seems like a structure like that could more easily hang below on the side of the bridge without having to, and be much cheaper than a new bridge. And I'm just wondering if you might have any comment on that kind of a design.
Sure. I don't have an answer about the pipe, so I can follow up with you on that. I can let you know that the Urban Mobility Office really is focused on moving all of the projects under its purview forward. So we are going to continue to be aggressive about all of them. And then your last point about the bikes, the environmental footprint of the project was set with the categorical exclusion. So at this point, we are moving forward with the project as planned, and the footprint that's planned. Their bikes and pedestrians are not allowed on the current bridge, and that is also what will happen for the future bridge. We have heard quite a bit from local communities that they're not that interested in having a route that is on the right-of-way adjacent to 205. And ODOT has just started working with local partners to do a separate effort, which I think you were referencing, to think about where would a bike pedestrian crossing make sense given the development that's planned in the area, and the regional bike and pedestrian planning that has been done. Where would it make the most sense? So we are just bringing a consultant on board to support that effort, and have been working closely with many of the staffs of folks that are on the screen tonight to plan that scope of work.
Yeah, that cycle track design we're planning in our transportation plan. It's now on Highway 43 and Willamette Falls Drive, so it would connect in at that level ultimately. Yeah. Yeah.
So we want to take into account kind of what's already planned and what would work there.
Thank you. I have Representative Meek next, followed by Mayor Knapp, and then Representative Brusack.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and hi, Mandy. Thanks for your presentation this evening. I had 2 questions. With the current funding that's going to the Rose Quarter project and some of the political upheaval with the approval process there, is that project, some of the extension lanes, those lanes that 205 just completed towards the I-2, towards Mall 205, are those extension lanes going to be currently worked on or continued, regardless of what their current political environment is there?
Yeah, and I'm sure my colleague Megan Channel, the project director, would be happy to come and do more of an extensive update, but we are doing everything that we can to continue to move that project forward, as we're also working with partners in the community and stakeholders to be there at the table as we move forward with those conversations. So, but you're right, it is that same similar, at least the part that's on the highway would be the same lane, an auxiliary lane or a lane that connects the ramps, so folks don't have to merge into the through traffic and then back again.
Okay, and then the second question is, with the survey results, I think it's open until September. When will that be made public, and where will we be able to, if the results come back that a lot of our community is not, in favor of this, how can we, is it the commission we need to talk to, or, where's the opportunity to communicate related to those results?
And I'm sorry, can you let me know what survey it is that you're asking about?
The survey that The one you just talked about, I-205 toll project?
The comment period.
Yeah, the comment period. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And
yes.
It
So
said survey, well, survey gizmo, but what
yes.
are you going to be doing with that material?
So there will be a full comment report that's prepared after the comment, after it closes. I don't know the specific timeline. I'm happy to follow up with Lucinda Broussard and get that information, but this will all be public information to share what the information is that came in, and then how it is used to influence the draft language for the purpose and needs statement, as well as the alternatives to be evaluated.
Great. And then the last final thing, just I heard you say that you're looking at different funding mechanisms, and that tolling could potentially be one. But if we could move forward with this project some way without that, we could. Is that correct?
Yes, at this point, we're open to funding options, and I have pursued, over the years, have pursued a variety of different options, including federal funds through the infra grant or other programs. We haven't been successful with those so far.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
I'm going to interject real quick. Representative Meek, later in our I-205 discussion, when we're talking about tolling, I think we have a slide prepared of the NEPA timeline. It'll talk more about when some of those other comment periods will be open. So we can share that here later in the meeting, but also, yes, Lucinda Broussard would be the best point of contact for those detailed questions. And Mayor Knapp, you have the floor, followed by Rep. Prusak, Mayor Axelrod, and then Mayor Hodson.
Thank you. It's not clear to me through this whole process. We've had at least 3 different official committees that are gathering information and doing studies. And I think it's getting confusing as to which all committees we have commented to and which all ones we need to still comment to, and who's making which decisions when, and whose authority extends to what thing and not to something else. And I think that's problematic. Our packet contains a copy of this July 30 memo from the Tolling Diversion Impact Policy Committee. And within that are 7 separate questions that are kind of modeled, or comments that are kind of made. Is that information relevant to you directly in your capacity, or do we need to do something further to get that information into your consideration, or where is it?
Those comments will be for the tolling team and the tolling program underneath Lucinda Broussard. So I appreciate that there's a lot of information coming out from a variety of different places at ODOT, and yeah, I think we'd all be open to ideas of how we could help simplify or streamline that. But all of the tolling process, the decision making, the environmental review, that is not under me. That is all being managed by Lucinda.
Okay. The 7 different points made in that all seem to me to be quite logical. They point out a variety of different further studies that need to be done, talk about the impacts on surface streets, talk about the effects of tolling to a certain point, or not to that point, but to some other point. Here in Wilsonville on the south end, I note that there are potentials for our intersections to become utilized by people who are trying to get off of I-5 or off of 205 to avoid paying tolls, and that is a significant concern about what that does to our surface transportation options. It's not clear to me still about whether those analyses are being done that would consider each alternative within that larger picture of, if you do this alternative, what are these specific impacts on all these different streets, surface streets, including down to and including the Wilsonville interchanges. Within this, it's noted that the 2027 demand modeling shows what they're saying is significant impacts on local streets. And I wish I was more confident that each individual alternative can and will be evaluated with regard to those impacts, and not just to the projection for traffic flows on the I-5 and 205 systems. How do we be sure that that happens?
This is, I mean, the timing is right for you to be asking these questions and raising these concerns. That, as I mentioned, the NEPA process is just starting out to look at the tolling analysis and to develop the scope of work for what that analysis will be. So I would encourage you to submit those questions and those comments through the channels to the tolling team, so that they're able to count them as comments during this comment period, which just kicked off on Monday.
And it goes till September sometime, is that what I read?
It's 45-day comment period.
Okay.
And this is just the first of many comment periods. So this is on the purpose and need, and to think about the alternatives to be further evaluated and screened. So
yeah, well, I feel like we've been commenting for some years now. And
I know.
Go ahead and don't forget to comment. And so I'm just,
I know.
it's really hard.
Thank you for your continued, ability to comment. And I know it's a lot.
Yeah, it's critical, and we're, looking at the 2027 modeling is one thing. I think we're getting close enough. We need to be looking at the 2040 modeling also, and be clear before we are so far committed to one or the other of these alternatives that we suddenly realize we've overlooked something and it isn't really going to be quite what we want to have in the long run. So I guess the last thing I would ask is the discussion about tolling on I-5 as well as 205 still robustly in the mix, or is that up to somebody else that we really don't know the answer to?
Right, so tolling under I-5 also falls under the toll program under Lucinda's management. And that process is underway also. It will be a longer planning period before actually starting NEPA. So it'll be kind of a pre-NEPA period to really think through all of the alternatives that are on the table, and to get it down to a manageable set before moving forward to the formal NEPA process. So I think that the schedule at the beginning maybe projected that a year and a half out or so before NEPA would start on I-5.
So if those are on two different timelines, what would seem to me to be critical is that we look at the alternatives for 205 with an eye to what if this is ultimately done on 205? Does that change, or excuse me, on if I-5 is put into a tolling situation, what are the relative impacts on travel patterns on the 205 that we're now looking at? And don't just look at 205 now independently of saying, well, we don't know what's going to happen on I-5, so we're not going to consider it at all. I think it's very relevant. The primary diversion points, I think are going to be along I-5, going to be here in Wilsonville. On the 205, I think Stafford Road is going to be a huge one, which I believe West Lynn is going to be concerned about. But we're on the south end of Stafford, and so that concerns us too. And then, of course, the Oregon City side. So the other discussion about whether they convert the arch bridge to a bike ped bridge only, or whether they do that and build an alternative bridge across the river there for local access. I mean, we've got some very significant, substantial questions here to try to judge what's appropriate. So
I'm going to interject respectfully and note that Mandy is our subject matter expert on the project, the widening and seismic improvement project specifically. We do have some time for tolling here later in the meeting. And to your point, Mayor Knapp, there are so many moving pieces on this project right now, hence the reason and timeliness for this C4 meeting today to kind of bring those different pieces to light. And it's, yes, my job, I think, is to help Chris keep us on track per topic, and we have Mandy for about 10 more minutes. So that's a time check. Next,
Trent,
we have,
Trent,
yes?
Hang on, my ears perked up. Mayor Knapp, where did you hear about turning the arch bridge into a pedestrian bike bridge?
Well, it's in that I-5 tolling project NEPA alternatives memo that's in your C4 packet today.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Webb, take a look at that, please.
Okay, so we have Representative Prusak, you're our next hand up, followed by Mayor Axelrod, Mayor Hodson, Councilor Reyes, and then Mayor Holliday. And I'll just note again, we have Mandy for about 10 more minutes before this part of the meeting would advance. Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for letting me join you and comment. And it's nice to talk about something outside of COVID. And mine might just be comments now that I know that you really aren't here to answer questions about tolling. But it does follow up on what everybody else is saying. And I would just say the community that I represent, Westland, is really, they don't believe that their comments are going to be heard. And I think it's because of all of the times that we've been repeating ourselves over and over again, how the current plan will negatively impact us. I live off the 43, Councilor Lewis lives off Willamette. We know what the diversion does when during pre-COVID times. So I'd like to know how I can reassure them. Is there going to be, for example, out of a work group that I chair, everything that everybody mentions is grouped and everybody can see it afterwards. It's public record of what comments and suggestions are made from our discussions. And then just to follow up also on the tolling, knowing that there was 260% increase in traffic entering the 205 at Stafford because of diversion. How do we know that that's not going to stay the same or worsen when people try to avoid tolling? Like, is that getting looked at? And also, how do I reassure the community? Thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate both your comments, Representative. I can pass them on to Lucinda Broussard and her team. I do know that she is deeply committed to listening to what the public and the users of the facility and the adjacent communities have to say, and also to demonstrating what happens to that information as it comes in. So I think those of you that have met with her and heard presentations from her have likely heard her speak about those topics. And I know that she would be happy to meet with you all again, or for the first time if you haven't had the chance to meet with her so far. So there will be regular and ongoing reports of the comments that are coming in, as well as information about how they were used and considered. And I know that she'd be more than happy to come back and talk to you about the specifics of that for her project and her schedule.
Great. And
diversion is front of mind for her. Sorry about in
okay.
terms of issues and concerns. So it's high on the list and will definitely be looked at and evaluated as the project moves forward.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Axelrod?
Just real quick on the 205 design, I assume since the NEPA is done that there's been a decision on the acoustic controls, but I didn't hear a comment on it. Your map was so small, I didn't quite see that. Can you just comment on what was the final decision in terms of the extent of the acoustic controls? Is that part of phase 1 or that segment, or is part of phase 2, or how?
The sound walls?
Yeah.
Yes, I think that there has been a decision for all the locations except for one where there still is new development that might be coming in. So I can follow up with you on that so that I don't get the locations wrong and mix them up right now.
Okay.
But yes, that has largely been decided.
Okay.
Mayor Hodson.
Thank you. I just want to thank Representative Meeks and Prusak for being on tonight. Thank you. My questions for the two of you. What is the legislature entertaining in terms of support for I-205? And by support, I mean funding.
Me?
Yeah, well, we both can respond, but when you say legislature, it's the whole legislature isn't, but it's going to be members. We have been working together as a caucus. They're Clackamas County legislators, which are both Senate members and the House members. And we have been working together. I'm now the co-chair of that caucus, along with Representative Rick Lewis from Silverton. And we have made it one of our top priorities to work together to determine what would be the best solution to try to present legislation, whether it's an amendment to House Bill 2017, or whether it's new legislation that would support that, in order for us to find a different way, in order to support a different funding mechanism to make sure that this is more of a top priority so that we can begin this project more immediately. And if we're talking once the funding's here, it's going to take potentially 18 to 24 months. We're potentially looking at 2025. And that to me is unacceptable. But know this, that we are, as a group, Representative Pruzak, we have Representative Drazen, Senator Wagner, Representative Salinas, Reardon, the rest, Representative Bynum. We are all working together to make sure that we can do some good, to make sure we can have Clackamas County's voice heard and our residents heard and our communities heard. So that we are working on, and we should have something ready to propose by the beginning of 2021 session.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and I know it's cutting into your time, Mandy, but I think it's important for you to hear, so I'm thankful for the question. You know, we worked so hard for an amendment to 2017 last session, and that meant causing a lot of trouble, but I'm okay with that. It was good trouble. It was the right thing to do. And we didn't get it done. And we are even more determined to now, and we will be in conversations with those from the Rose Quarter that kind of saw us as wanting to take their money for our project because we were ready, but now working together with how we can, to me, have more of a regional solution, knowing that, you know, I think that, in my opinion, I'm just going to be honest, ODOT gets to point to us in the legislature because of House Bill 2017, which Meek was angry at, and I wasn't there yet. And then legislature, you know, points to ODOT. And then there was us, Rose Quarter, against 205. And I think now is a perfect opportunity for us to all work together and say that the current plan that was passed in 2017 isn't good and we need to change it. And I know that there isn't a single person in Meek's community and my community that is okay with the way it is now. So we have to make changes. And so if that means doing it through the legislature, we're going to keep trying and do it. But I'm determined, and I know Meek is, and I know the Clackamas County caucus is. And I think when you have a group of bipartisan and bicameral legislators, it's quite powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Reyes, your hand was up and now it's down. If you had,
no,
a question.
I changed. I went from my cell phone to my laptop. So yes, Mandy, thank you for your presentation. It was very brief. I like that. I just wanted to just bring in a little bit of, you mentioned funding for Stafford, and because that's what my concern is. I'm in Tualatin, so definitely our concern will be the Stafford Road exit, because that would definitely affect our area, especially there's a clinic, there's a hospital, there's a food pantry around that area. So definitely that's going to be a good for us. That's very important that we're not bringing more stress to that area. So you mentioned funding. So I think this was brought up, I don't know when, or have been in so many meetings, but is the money that's being collected, like say for instance, for tolling, is it going into the cities that are being like to support the roads and the areas in the city, or is that specifically for other things? So whatever the tolling money that's being collected, what is that being used for?
Right, so the details of that will be a decision made by the Transportation Commission down the road. Generally, though, toll revenue is used first to manage the system, the toll system, pay those costs. There's often like a debt service that's required. And then the decision about the extra revenue that might be available still has not been made. So that will be a commission decision.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mayor Holliday, your hand was up too, and now it's down. We have Mandy for maybe another minute or two, and then we need to keep moving. Did you have a question, or did that move on?
I'm good.
Thank you. Mayor Hodson, Chris, Mandy, final comments?
Well, my presentation was short because I thought there'd be a lot of comments, and there were. I am happy to come back and do a longer presentation on the 205 project if that would be helpful. And I also, think it might be helpful for Lucinda to come to a future meeting so you could have a more in-depth conversation about tolling. I know it's frustrating when you have a presenter in front of you and they're not able to answer all of your questions. And so, maybe Lucinda and I should pair up more in the future. But thank you for your patience and your understanding that she really is the subject matter expert for the toll program. And I know she'd be more than happy to come and join a meeting with you in the future.
Thanks so much, Mandy. And as Jamie and I get into our final updates here, if you're able to still hang on and be here in the event that we have additional questions, that'd be great. But recognize it's also 7:30 at night, so.
I can stay a little bit. I have a 6-year-old and I'm hearing a lot of noise upstairs, so I might not make it through your whole meeting.
Understood, thanks.
But thank you, was great to meet you all virtually. I look forward to working with you closely in the future.
One quick question, could you drop your email in the chat so that we can contact you easily?
Yes, and if you want to pull up the last slide real quick, Trent, it's on that one as well, whatever is easier for you.
Thank you.
I'll add it to the chat.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks so much, Mandy. Okay, I'm gonna try to give a pretty quick update as well on where we're at with funding beyond what Mandy's shared. So as Reps Meek and Prusak have mentioned, our Clackamas legislators really made a valiant attempt at a bill in February. As we saw, it died with significant pushback, but they really stuck their necks out on that effort and ruffled a lot of feathers, and certainly are agitating, as we really need to be doing on 205. But it really helped to start those conversations that were necessary. And so I feel like what Rep. Prusak had to say is exactly right. What we have been seeing over the past few years is this continued finger pointing between the legislature and ODOT on whose responsibility it is to figure this out. And so that is really what our aim has been, to put a stop to that finger pointing and really work to crack this funding nut. And so since session, we've really been, the county's been working hard with our regional partners to advance this effort on what our next steps look like on funding. And I'll say, we certainly appreciate that ODOT is looking at tolling as a way to pay for the project. But as Mandy said, the timing is an issue and the amount of likely revenue is an issue, which is years out. So that presents significant problems for this project, particularly because it's essentially going to be ready to proceed after this year. So, and we don't feel that ODOT has taken advantage of all the funding opportunities that are out there. For instance, there was a federal infra grant opportunity this year that they chose not to apply for, but that could have been a way to get tens of millions of dollars for this project if we were successful. So that was a disappointment to us, and hopefully the next round of that they will choose to apply. But again, over the past few months, we have been putting most of our efforts at the regional level, and in particular at ODOT's Region 1 Area Commission on Transportation, the R1 Act. Commissioner Savas is the vice chair of the group, and back in June, at their June meeting, ODOT gave a presentation on I-5 and I-205 tolling, and as part of that, there was a good discussion around the funding gaps of these bottleneck projects from HB 2017. So over the past 2 months since then, we have been doing a lot of outreach to all these R1 Act members to advance a request to the Oregon Transportation Commission for them to convene a table of stakeholders focused on identifying solutions to complete the funding gaps on the original 3 bottleneck projects that were in HB 2017, as well as others that we know are in the queue, such as the I-5 bridge, Highway 26 and the Boone Bridge. And a number of you have been part of that effort at the R1 Act, so thanks so much for all of your help on that. And all of that culminated on Monday, this Monday, again at the R1 Act's latest meeting, with a great discussion, and ultimately Mayor Hodson making a motion to make that request of the OTC, and the vote passed 19-3, and the letter was sent just yesterday by Mandy to the OTC, and I believe Trent emailed that out to this group this morning, the final letter. So the hope with that is to give our legislators, Reps Prusak and Meek and others, some tools back at the legislature to be able to fight for us by showing that regional consensus and support, and getting this to be coming at the legislature in a more official capacity, and not just from local governments, but from the agency itself. And so what that request specifically asks for, again, is for the OTC to convene this table of stakeholders to develop findings and recommendations on those funding solutions that can be provided to the legislature in advance of the 2021 session, so that then they have this official body of work, let's call it, from the OTC with the regional buy-in to act on. So all in all, it's been a really successful effort, and that's really starting the process to get that moving. And along the way, we are coordinating with the Clackamas caucus, as Rep. Meek mentioned, and as the new co-chair of the caucus, and we'll be continuing to coordinate with the caucus to be involved in this effort, and being the legislators on point back in Salem, working with their colleagues to advance this in the 2021 legislature. So one question is, what can you as individual jurisdictions do? And there is a specific ask right now, and that is you can write letters to the OTC with this request, essentially backing up what the R1 Act has already done in sending this letter to them this week. Clackamas County has been doing a lot of work, doing some outreach to the OTC commissioners. We've met with Chair Van Brocklin, Commissioner Simpson, and we're in the process of meeting with the other 3 commissioners so that we can establish that personal relationship, but also make sure they are aware of the dynamics here in the metro area, especially those that aren't from the Portland metro area, so that when this decision comes before them and they're hearing about this this state funding issue and regional issue, they understand the background. So again, if your jurisdictions are willing to, in the next week or two, send a letter to the OTC supporting that effort from the R1 Act and reiterating the ask for them to convene this table of stakeholders, that would certainly be helpful. And we're also asking the same of our business community and legislators, because I think the more voices the OTC hears from on that, the better. So that's really the update from the state and regional level, and I also want to just put in a plug for where things are at the federal level, because there has been a little bit of action there. Last month, you may know that the House of Representatives passed the 5-year transportation reauthorization bill, which reauthorizes the FAST Act. And it was included in the massive $1.5 trillion infrastructure package, which was HR 2, known as the Moving Forward Act. And it was passed also under the guise of being kind of like a COVID-19 recovery type package that included infrastructure. The Senate, unfortunately, has been much slower to act. While the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee did pass a much smaller transportation bill to the tune of $287 billion. Other committees have not produced anything yet, and certainly nothing has come to the floor. So at this point, we actually just heard from Congressman DeFazio yesterday that he is now expecting that they will need to pass a short-term extension because he doesn't expect the Senate to have the time now, given everything else on its plate, to pass an infrastructure bill. And all of that said, these bills do not have any earmarks in them. So there is really not an opportunity to get specific funding for I-205. That said, there are always ways that the legislators, if the Senate so chose, it could include language in a transportation bill that provides criteria around the types of projects that could be eligible for funding, for certain pots of funding. So that is a way you could kind of direct funding to certain projects. But again, without the earmarks, I think there's better ways we can spend our time in where we're advocating in terms of where we should be seeking those dollars for 205. So with that, I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer any questions that this group has.
And you have one teed up, Mayor Axelrod, you have the floor.
And on the follow-up letters, I mean, should C4 be sending a letter?
I think that the more individual letters that the OTC hears from jurisdictions, the better. So that would be my recommendation.
So Chris, to clarify, you're saying probably not a C4 letter, but if the individual jurisdictions sent letters on their own behalf, that would provide a broader narrative? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think it shows that there's, rather than having one letter from C4, I think it would be more show of force to have 10 letters from 10 different cities. And if you want to speak to specific issues that relate to your city, associated with 205, then they're getting a bit more of a flavor for why this is such an important issue to be addressed.
Some of us are kind of going a little bit into recess in August. I'm not sure about all the other cities and all, but have you guys considered maybe drafting a letter that we might all use as a framework that we might tweak, or you want us to each do it individually?
My recommendation would be to refer to the R1 Act letter, which really gives the framework for what I think we need and what the justification is.
Okay.
Councilor Heisey, I have your hand up.
Yeah, this is more of a general comment than anything, and I want to preface it by saying I do really appreciate Representatives Meek and Prusek and their advocacy for including bus on shoulder and the possibility of rapid transit. That meant a lot to Milwaukee to make sure that was included. I got to say, it makes me a little nervous that what I'm hearing from ODOT is more of a we're not going to stand in the way, because as we all know, if you don't have that vision included from the very get-go, it's very easy for these sorts of things to come by the wayside the farther you go. So as we're thinking about this OTC commission to talk about funding, I just would really appreciate if we can keep bus on shoulder and bus rapid transit in that conversation, And if that means that we need to make sure that some of our regional transit providers are at the table, that's great. I don't particularly care how it happens. I just want to make sure that that remains part of the mix in that conversation, because there may be places where funding that can support small pieces of making that happen could be rolled into the construction costs and make a huge difference to enable that down the road, but not make a huge difference in the overall bottom line for the project.
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly right. I think we want this to be a broad-based table. TriMet is a member of the R1 Act. Unfortunately, they weren't able to attend on Monday, but I have had a conversation with Bernie Bottomley about this effort, and that, you know, TriMet might be a stakeholder that should be at that table. So
Great.
They're fully aware of it.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Commissioner Savas, I have you next.
Yeah, I just want to build on Commissioner Heisey's comments and also Councilor Lewis's earlier comments about the transit system. You know, I think that ODOT can help accommodate in their engineering to make sure that, you know, the capacity is there for the weight on the bridge and all the other bridges, and also the width of the highway to accommodate whether it's bus on shoulder or BRT. But later this year, when we get our transit study finished, I think we can really broach that conversation about, so who provides the service? Because ODOT's not in the transit service, so we need to figure out how that's going to happen. And it's one of the sore spots with me in a number of efforts, that there is not much opportunity apparently or signaling from TriMet that there's any room to provide any new additional service out our way in Clackamas County. There is a little bit that came with STIF, so we appreciate TriMet's work, and there's a committee that's been working on those dollars to get service incrementally added to new areas. But the transit system that Councilor Lewis was speaking about, really all the ancillary roads that connect to 205, you know, and the stops for, if it is BRT or bus on shoulder, how those buses stop, unload, and take passengers and so on, has to be integrated with a system that works, you know, in those areas that can connect people. So routes connecting to routes, essentially. But yeah, that's something we're focusing on, and I think it'll be a great opportunity when that transit study is finished that we broach that conversation in a big way.
All right, I have no additional hands up on this, and we're at about time for this topic. Councilor Reyes, I see you there.
Yes, Chris, just to clarify, these letters, because I'm going to bring back all this information back to my to the city and the rest of the council. So just to be clear, these letters will be submitted to representative at the federal level?
No, the letters would go to the Oregon Transportation Commission.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. Next, we have our very own Jamie Stasny, who's going to give a quick update on tolling and the NEPA comment period.
Good evening, everyone. Let me get my presentation up here. Have a couple slides to share with you all. So now that we've been talking about the tolling project, I can give you a little bit of an update on the tolling project. I have to say, as a staff person who's been at the county for about a year, this is really confusing to me that there was a separate project, which is what Mandy was talking about, and that there's this new tolling effort going on. Seems to be some overlap, but it's very confusing and highly technical. So bear with me as we get through this. I'm going to be focusing on the I-205 tolling project update and also talking about this NEPA comment period that is coming up and actually has just been opened. So this is a slide that shows the timeline for the I-205 tolling project. Many of you have probably seen this, and I've added a little bit of a line here to show you where we're at in that process. The point is, we're really early in this process. So as Mandy was sharing, the separate project for 205 has already gone through the environmental process. It's already being designed. It's kind of already pretty far down the line toward being ready. But the tolling analysis and the study they're doing is just really kicking off. So ODOT has been doing a ton of outreach. They've been preparing what they're calling their draft range of alternatives, which I will share with you. And they have just published the draft purpose and needs statement and these project alternatives and opened up the first comment period. But I also want to point out that there's going to be another round of comment coming up later on. Right now it's slotted for Q4 of 2021. Once they get feedback this first round, they're going to do a bunch more analysis and they're going to come back with that draft environmental assessment and seek comments again. So we're early in the process. There'll be a lot of opportunity for input. So as I was just sharing, there's a 45-day comment period. It's focused on the draft purpose and needs statement for the project and the range of alternatives. Kicked off on August 3rd and it closes on September 16th. And I know Trent sent out a bunch of information and links in your packet. So there's a lot more information and detail here. We can follow up after if you have questions. But that's what we're talking about here is this first 45-day comment period. So after this happens, as I was saying, they'll prepare the draft environmental assessment, do a lot of additional analysis, and then they'll take it back out for public comment period on the draft EA. Many of you have probably seen this slide. If you've seen a presentation from Lucinda, her ears must be burning because we've all been talking about her tonight. She's the tolling manager at ODOT. I know she's been in front of this group once, and it sounds like maybe back with us again to answer questions. But this slide captures how ODOT is approaching this committee structure for decision-making on the tolling project. As you can see, there are a lot of committees, and they all kind of filter up to the Oregon Transportation Commission, the OTC, and they're the ones who will make a decision and set the toll rates and so on. We have staff, and many of you may have staff from your jurisdictions that are on these committees. The Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee is one that's getting a lot of press, been very active. We have staff there. We also have the Transit and Multimodal Working Group. They are looking at options for transit and multimodal impacts and analyzing those pieces. And then there's a regional modeling group and a project modeling group that are looking at the really technical modeling details. As well as public and community engagement to local groups. So they may have been out to your city they've been to a lot of business groups. They've been to groups such as the Region 1 Act and JPACT. They're kind of coming out to everyone and doing a ton of outreach. But as we've heard tonight in this conversation, there is a lot of concern in Clackamas County about diversion specifically and the impacts to the communities that are directly adjacent to the tolling area or the proposed tolling area, as well as to communities that are on the edges that will also be potentially impacted by diversion. So because we didn't think there were enough committees here, we went ahead and created our own, which we decided to call the I-205 Tolling Diversion Policy Committee. This committee we brought to you, I think it was last time you all met, we brought the idea in front of you and let you know we're gonna be doing this. It's an ad hoc committee made up of agencies that are immediately adjacent to the proposed tolling agency, or tolling area, excuse me, and 2 additional agencies that are kind of from the edge area. And their mission is to review the technical materials, and there's a lot of them coming out of ODOT, and to organize policy recommendations to be delivered to stakeholders who could be impacted by diversion that would be created by the proposed tolling project. And in addition to this policy committee, there's a technical working group, which is comprised of the staff from these jurisdictions who are doing the analysis and then presenting to them. So this group has been meeting. They've met twice, I believe, and the technical group has met a handful of times. And the letter that you saw that was emailed to you all today came from those conversations with that diversion committee. So Trent's going to be stepping you all through that in a few minutes when I finish up, but I wanted to show you these alternatives. We keep talking about alternatives, and I want to make sure the project is top of mind for everyone, so I want to share these. When ODOT started this work, they started with 5 alternatives. And I've got them organized in a strange way here, and I'll tell you why. We are understanding now from the consultant group that ODOT is working with that after doing some early analysis, they're really looking at eliminating some of the alternatives. The comment period right now, they're accepting comments on all of these alternatives, and the comments that you see in the letter do include comments on some of these alternatives on this first page. But their direction is to remove the tolling alternatives 1 and 2 from consideration. Those 2 essentially look the same when they do the modeling work, which is a direct toll on the Abernathy Bridge, so just one gantry placed on the bridge, or number 2, where they've got a couple other gantries, but essentially they're just tolling that Abernathy Bridge. They also have alternative 5 that they'd like to eliminate, which is a single zone toll. And the way that works is you pay one rate for that, any piece that you use of that area. So if you hop on, you're paying the same rate as someone that's using the entire length of the area. So they're proposing to eliminate those alternatives. And they want to focus on alternatives 3 and 4. Alternative 3 is called individually tolled. And the way they're looking at doing this is tolling 2 bridges that will be rebuilt, the Abernathy Bridge and the Tualatin River Bridge. So there'll be 2 collection points or gantries placed there on the bridges. And then alternative 4, which are segment-based tolls. So essentially you'd pay a portion of the toll depending on how much of the section of road you use. And there would be 4 collection points there. So between 82nd and 99, Abernathy Bridge, between Oregon 43 and 10th Street, and then between 10th and Stafford. So those 4 points. And when ODOT did their analysis, this is a very high level summary of the work they did. There is a lot of detail here, and we're happy to go into more if you would like it. But essentially, they did this quick table to show how things ranked. And so, as I mentioned, alternative 1 and 2, which was the just tolling the Abernathy Bridge, those outcomes were basically the same for both alternatives. So they thought there were worse outcomes for these, essentially, especially with cost and revenue. And also, I think, as we saw, as we looked deeper, some of the diversion effects were way worse, especially on specific cities, such as Oregon City, because you just put that one gantry there. There's a lot of ways to avoid crossing that, essentially. And then alternative 5, they are proposing to remove, but you can see there are some better outcomes in some of the areas. And so you'll notice in the letter that we drafted for you all based on the policy group's recommendations, we actually suggested they include a version of alternative 5, because one of the reasons that they would like to remove that is there is more cost for implementation and operations, essentially because there are more gantries on alternative 5. So it costs more to put it in and to maintain it. So they'd like to remove that. But you can also see that there are better outcomes for the top 2 categories, transportation system demand and I-205 traffic impacts. So we think there could be some value there. So we're actually recommending that they continue to look at that one. So it's a very high level look at some of their early analysis and the alternatives that they are considering. I think that's it, yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Trent, and I wanna just reiterate, staff is working, and we put this group together to be able to analyze the information that's coming out. There is not a foregone conclusion to this yet, and we are approaching it and providing the information just so we can make sure we're analyzing everything and providing it to the diversion committee and to all of you, so you have the information. So we're just essentially funneling the information to you. This isn't any proposal from us to do any of this. We're just sharing the information. So I just want to make that really clear. And I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Trent. Happy to answer questions. Trent's going to walk through the letter with you all with the policy recommendations.
Thank you, Jamie. And I see hands raising. If you would just give me 1 second to pull up the letter we're talking about here. And we can do this in a number of ways. But I'll just kind of give a quick overview of the letter that we're talking about. So earlier today, I sent a draft letter that would be the comment from C4. And as we've already discussed, the Tolling Diversion Impact Committee has sent out a memo of recommended comments. And what we've done as staff is taken those comments and drafted this letter based on that feedback that we think is consistent with what has been provided from that group, as well as consistent with comments we've heard here at C4 in the past. It's a pretty big letter and dense, and they just met, that policy group, they just met last Wednesday, and very tricky to then turn around a draft letter for C4's review the following day when the packet for C4 would have been released, and then a few other things that delayed this. So I do apologize for this draft coming out today, around lunchtime or just after lunchtime. So with that in mind, and kind of noting the 45-day comment period, C4 could comment today, or they could comment at their next C4 meeting, which is near the end. My recommendation is sooner rather than later. And if you don't feel comfortable finalizing today's comment, Perhaps an alternative could be finalizing the intent of the letter here today and asking for the weekend to review and provide additional feedback to me. The executive committee meets on Monday, and I could provide that feedback to the executive committee. And since if you do provide agreement that this is the right direction to go, the executive committee can then accept those edits on Monday and sign it and formalize it. So there's an alternative with the late letter note in mind, and then I'll skim this really quick. It is some very normal, thank you for this opportunity to comment. Thank you for being inclusive. High-level overarching concerns, the financial necessity and benefits of tolling the section of I-205 have not been clearly articulated. We've heard that over and over. Requesting the OTC clarify its policy for funding of major highway improvements so that we can be assured that tolling will be applied equitably to major highway improvements in the region, as well as concern about a lack of clarity around the intentions and policies regarding toll revenue allocation, and recommend that toll revenue generated in a corridor remain in that corridor. As you can tell, I'm not going to read the whole letter. Here is a sort of a shorthand list of what came from that tolling memo, which was in your packet last week. It is very shorthand, and then a few comments here at the end about what Jamie described, concerns about diversion, and concerns about the idea to how to remedy some of those findings from the environmental study, and things that are important to C4 that I've heard in the past, and I think would be reflected here if you agree. But again, that's a super high level overview. I'm going to leave this letter up to go up and down as you need while we have this discussion. And then thank you, Zoom, for being so user friendly. You tell me. Zoom tells me who had their hand up first. It's Mayor Holliday.
Thanks, Trent. So I just want to make a statement. Oregon City is going to be opposed to any kind of tolling that does not keep the tolling funds in the 205 corridor for that purpose. This whole idea is about trying to drive people off of 205 or to get people out of their cars. It's the same old left-wing metro stuff that we've been hearing for years. And the fact is that people aren't going to get out of their cars. It's just not going to happen. And so if we continue to make it more difficult to travel on our freeways, all that stuff is just going to happen into Oregon City and down 99 to Canby. My business is in Canby. I'm obviously the mayor of Oregon City. I travel that road twice at least every day. And anytime there's anything happening on I-5 or 205, that's the diversion that people take to get off of the system and get back into southern Portland. So without some confidence that the money that is generated from this tolling is going to be used for actual roads and not for other kinds of bike ped and other silliness, we won't be supporting this.
Thank you, Mayor Holliday. And on your screen, I've highlighted the section in the letter where I think we addressed that concern. So that will be reflected in the C4 letter if this is approved. Commissioner Savas, you're next.
Yeah, to build on this conversation, if it's not already, as earlier mentioned, confusing enough to talk about the I-205 project as a construction project, and then also to have that somewhat confusion of conflating the two with the tolling. There's two types of tolling that are conflated altogether, which is tolling to build the capacity, where the dollars are used strictly for the increased capacity, and then the other tolling, they merge together into this value pricing, congestion pricing, demand pricing type of tolling. So that's how confusing all of this is. What we did decide in that committee, and if you could scroll down, Trent, to the line about the no build option, no toll, no build, which is one of our recommendations. I believe that's included, there it is. So just so all you know, we decided to add that. And I think here's the justifiable, defensible reason for us all, in light of all the environmental aspects that we're all states adopted and the federal government has adopted. We got to remember that these are not just state regulations, there's federal regulations. So responsibly, and the mayor touched on it, a lot of people aren't going to get out of their cars, and the reason is, what other choice do you have? Plain and simple. That's why the earlier comments about offering alternatives or building a transit system has to be at the forefront. At the R1 Act on Monday night, I pointed out to Lucinda, the tolling manager for this, for their study project, that to base the current diversion that's happening as a baseline, that they don't want to make it any worse, is not acceptable, because it's not acceptable today, the amount of congestion that we have. So they need to revisit that. I want to say that again, because it's really important. I think that Councilor Lewis especially knows where one of the third lanes of I-205 is, right through Willamette Drive. And that is that they are basing the diversion levels to not exceed the current diversion levels today. And the current diversion levels today are just simply not acceptable. So we need to have them re-examine that. And because basically you add the third lane to I-205, and then if they have diversion that is backfilled and replaces the other diversion, then the neighborhoods of 43 and Willamette Drive and Oregon City and all the areas that currently suffer from diversion, they're going to base that to try and keep that as the baseline. That's not acceptable. Thank you.
Mr. Martin Myers.
Hi, everyone. Real quickly, first of all, I would echo Trent's comment that however we leave this tonight, I think that we should give the executive committee a chance to clean up this first draft letter, if at all possible, to not alter its substance, which I generally agree with. I like it a lot, but I think that we could perhaps make it more effective if given a chance. So I'd echo that request. The only other comments or questions I had were on 3B and E, and I think the presentation answered 3B, why we are focusing on 3, 4, and 5. I think that's a good idea. I read E, though, however, as being perhaps an alternative 6, if I have it right. And I was curious if someone could explain the logic behind it and the thinking behind it. Thanks, that's all I have.
Thank you for your question, Martin. That suggestion came out of the technical committee that's staffing the policy group, and mostly from staff from Oregon City and also staff from Tualatin, who noted that if the tolling gantries are placed, like, for example, Stafford Road, if the gantry is placed on the Westland, Oregon City side of that exit, many people will just hop right off on the Stafford exit and will divert there. So if the gantry is placed before that, then it will capture them, so they will not be able to escape, so to speak, from paying the toll. So same thing on the other side on 213. If it's placed before the exit, then people just hop right off. So they wanted to extend the area a little bit further, and we thought that made a lot of sense.
Good. To clarify, they wanted to extend the study of that and make sure that analysis was included. That's not the final result. That's just, please study that section as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, good. I think that I had one maybe substantive comment, and that is on the paragraph right above it, where it says this analysis should include state highway. I would interlineate there and county roads, if possible. But other than that, my other comments would be non-substantive. Thank you.
Thank you. I have received a few recommended, we'll call them Scrivener edits from a few members. And so if this does move to the executive committee, we can incorporate those as well. Mayor Knapp, I see your hand up.
Thank you. To build on Councilor Heisey's comments about transit and Commissioner Salvis's comments that there is no other alternative, transit would be the only other alternative if we were going to try to provide it. The very last, there you go, last sentence, I have read that and it seems to me to be weak and not adequate. I think we really need to say in this letter that it must be planned from the start to accommodate bus on shoulder and or future high-speed bus service doing the design, so that we don't end up at a point somewhere down the road where, oh yeah, we really can't do that because we just put all this money into 205 and it really isn't set up to do that, and we have to go on to some other priorities now. I would like to push harder than just that one bare reference to transit alternatives, and talk about the need that the entire project needs to include that component as a criteria.
So Mayor Knapp, for clarification, if that, we'll call it an edit, is accepted or agreed to tonight or consensus upon, are you referring to the project itself, which is a separate from the tolling, what Mandy was describing earlier, the I-205 widen seismic improvement project, or are you referring specifically to this tolling diversion project, which is this letter is replying to?
Well, therein is the problem of the whole process, because one can't work without the other, and one is on a timeline where it's plowing ahead because the legislature told them they had to, and the other is, going along behind and not really catching up. And I'm open to guidance, I guess, from staff on how best to do this, but I am seriously concerned that it's fallen between the cracks between the different entities that are adhering to their own scope, and it isn't in their scope. So here again, we're pointing fingers back and forth.
Thank you for that. That does help me clarify it a little bit. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I just want to build on Mayor Knapp's point, which is a good one, and suggest that it's not just the 205 service. It's going to be adequate connecting routes so that people in, whether they're in Stafford or Borland or Tualatin or in Oregon City, Gladstone, whatever, that they can actually get to, the main line. If there's a main line that runs up and down I-205, there needs to be connectivity, transit connectivity, so that people can get from their homes. The topography in West Lynn and Oregon City and surrounding areas is not practical to walk, a lot of it. Some of it is, but a lot's not. And that's the piece that, I think a transit system alternative or something that relates to a system and neighborhood connectivity is going to be crucial in this area.
Which will directly affect the amount of diversion there is, because it is, as stated, the only other possible alternative to getting in your car.
That's right. That's right.
So I'd like to just share, there is a transit and multimodal committee that is working as a part of this ODOT decision-making conversation. And I believe there is a representative from SMART on that committee. And my understanding is adding transit service or figuring out funding for that could be a part of the mitigations process as they're looking at how to mitigate some of these impacts, and that conversation would come later as they narrow down which alternatives they're looking at and then really dig deep into analyzing that. So I think there will be more details and more meat, so to speak, to comment on regarding transit as we move further along in this process. So I just want to point that out.
All right, thank you. I want to do a quick time check. And Mayor Hodson and Chair Bernard, as the co-chair of C4, would you help facilitate the conversation on what to do with this letter, please? Oh, I also see Mayor Axelrod hand back up. A question that was not asked.
Well, let's finish Mayor Axelrod's question, and then.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to recall where I saw this, and I think it's toward the end of 2. I've always argued all along that in this analysis, well, for one, in just the broader picture, these comments we've had about the importance of integrating the design considerations of 205 with the tolling cannot be separated. I mean, we have to look at this holistically. And so I fully agree with, integrating this transportation element. I think it's just really important. And my question kind of is, in the statement, I've always argued that in doing this, moving forward, this NEPA analysis, ODOT really does need to look at some of the broader alternatives of a system-wide, a completely region-wide look at tolling. And is that kind of what I'm seeing at the bottom, the last part of item 2, where it says there, we request the analysis. It's kind of so small. Let me get my other version up.
It says that we request that this analysis include state highways that serve as major arterials in surrounding communities such as Oregon 99E, Oregon 212, Oregon 43, and Oregon 213.
Yeah, is that kind of getting at that sort of point? I couldn't quite tell. It's sort of a little obtuse.
This one does get to that, making sure that the traffic simulations, I think part of this is some of the information that they provided was based on the traffic that goes over, let's use the Arch Bridge, for example. It says this many trucks or this many cars go over the Arch Bridge on a given day. What it doesn't show is what happens to Highway 43 as a result of that many cars going over. So it says this is what goes on over the Arch Bridge every day. It doesn't say how long it takes for one car to go over that, where that some of that diversion might already exist. Jamie, would you say that was the tenor of this comment in particular?
I agree. I think we did have another section. I was just trying to pull the letter up. We did have another section talking about the regional tolling, Mayor Axelrod. And what we had asked, I believe it's in here, and I'm sorry I can't pull it up right now. But what we'd asked is that they model all of these alternatives. Here it is. I believe it's F there.
Yeah, I want to make sure that's in there. I think it's really important.
Yep. It's F. Can you go up just a bit, Trent, please? Thank you. So for all of the alternatives, we have a request that a version be modeled in which the equivalent tolls are implemented on I-5 in Portland, so that we can really see, at least from the original feasibility study, when they were looking at doing both of those at the same time, let's really look at what this will look like when those are both applied. As ODOT is telling us, they will be applied eventually on I-5 as well. So it seems a little silly to be just doing all this modeling, focusing on 205, knowing that in a few years they would be applying a toll there. So let's look at what it's going to look like when the system tolling is in place.
But I'm thinking also of 84 and 26. I mean, all those major elements, not just I-5 and 205.
That, yeah, that gets a little more complicated. Metro is in the process of doing their own congestion pricing study where they are looking at, I believe, a broader network and doing a lot of analysis on that right now. We're looking at the feasibility study that was done as directed by HB 2017, and they directed to look at I-5 and 205. So we're sort of narrowed within the scope that came from that conversation. But there is this broader study going on at Metro looking at a broader network of tolling. So there's a lot of deep analysis occurring on that. We could put a note in here, but I think it's a little bit out of the scope of the direction that ODOT has right now.
Well, maybe even if it's a footnote to understand that that should be analysis that's done to compare to these others. So when we get to this decision making, we don't wait another 2, 3, 4, 5 more years to do this other analysis. There should be this other parallel analysis that could be looked at when we also look at these alternatives, I think.
And Mayor Axelrod, I'll add that similar to the R1 Act letter, this is a good opportunity to for individual communities to start sharing their stories as well. You know, this is the C4 letter, but what West Lynn would produce would be, probably should be very different, or at least more honed in than what this larger C4 letter is going to accomplish. And the same thing would be true for City of Canby, City of Oregon City, and whomever does decide to submit. You're able to get into the more detailed nuance of how this is going to impact the downtown area of Oregon City, for example, or the impacts of what the Arch Bridge already does on Highway 43, in a much more specific narrative than what a big C4 letter is going to accomplish. And so that might be an appropriate place for that type of comment too.
Yeah, I guess I understand that, but I sort of feel like it gets diluted and it doesn't have the effect. Just coming from West Lynn, hearing that, I don't know, there's sort of two issues there. There's the more local impacts and issues around this tolling. And then there's the need to really, if we're looking at tolling and congestion pricing as an alternative towards long-term funding and all, it just seems like we need to look broader. And the fact that tolling just got triggered by this 205 project, now trying to sort of half morph to the rest of our network, is we're cutting our legs off. You know, I just feel like we're not being honest about, hey, we need a real broader look. So why not, okay, this is all great, but darn it, ODOT and everyone, do this broader look. We really need to do that. Sorry.
Nope, thanks. We can include that in any updates to this letter, depending on how C4 decides to move forward tonight. I do have one more question from Mayor Knapp, and then I want to turn it back over to Mayor
And maybe
Hodgson and
if
Chair
I could
Bernard.
just real quick, maybe that feeds into a legislative input and get leverage there, because I mean, ODOT's really only, I think, going to respond to the legislature. Clarifying ODOT's directive actually is what it's going to really take. So maybe it's what our legislators need to really get that message through. So maybe Rachel can comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. Everything that they're doing is because the legislature told them to do it. Again, before I was there and against Meek's desires. And that's what we're working to change. And so I don't know how it fits in this request from that letter, but whatever it is, I'm open to it for this combined effort of getting it done. I mean, that's what the plan is. And so one of the 20 committees, I was just saying I need a chart and a graph, and I'm serious because I really need one to figure it out.
Actually, I thought tonight we were going to talk about sort of legislative interest in upcoming, and I don't know, maybe there's a concept we want to get in around this clarification. I don't know.
Thank you. Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. My comment was really kind of a follow-up similar to Mayor Axelrod's, in that I think it's clear from this discussion that ODOT pursuing a narrow scope as directed is one of the issues, and the fact that we have so few alternatives for different modes or to get people to have a way to get out of their cars and get where they need to go. It's starting to sound very much like absent more legislative direction to build the improvements, allowing or taking into account that need is going to be a bottleneck. And I worry that absent more legislative direction, that's kind of where we're bound to end up. So I'm just kind of pleading, I guess, that the legislature maybe take a look or understand the complexity of this in ways that perhaps they didn't back in 2017.
Yeah, no, and I don't disagree with you all. I think everybody's head's been so into COVID, and it's good that we're talking about this to get it back on the radar for something definitive for 2021. We're starting to write up policy. But again, there's so many committees, so many tables. Our own Clackamas County Caucus, thankfully, Chris Lyons is hopefully putting all the pieces together. But we still have a little time, and we'll get the right direction and do that.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Savas, I do see your hand. I will note for the co-chairs, this is our meeting time right now. We are at time, and we have one more agenda item. But Commissioner Savas, I see your hand.
Yeah, just briefly, if you all recall the Gantt chart or the timeline chart that Jamie put up earlier, we're in the beginning, folks. This is a long, long ride. So we have a lot of opportunity, and I think the point is that all these jurisdictions ought to be sending your own letters, or CPOs, or whoever you are, and start loading up the first comment period. They need to know, and they need to know now.
Trent, we good?
Well, I need direction from C4. If this letter needs to work over the weekend for the executive committee to approve on Monday, we can do that. If the committee is good with the letter as is, we could do it tonight. What I'm hearing is there's a few recommendations to improve the letter. And so my recommendation to staff would be to approve the intent of this letter with the noted comments for executive committee to review a final draft on Monday when they meet.
I would agree.
Wilson?
Mayor Holliday?
Yes, I would move that we authorize the executive committee to take this letter, make the recommended changes, and send it on.
So a motion's been made. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further question or comment regarding that happening, everyone take the weekend, do what you need to do, tweak it, make additional comments so that staff can get that to the exec committee for Monday's meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed to that? Okay, we'll move forward in that fashion then. As we close this out, move to wrap up the meeting here and move into the calendar piece. For those cities that have been involved with the diversionary ad hoc group, go back to our last meeting that we had and look at all the diversion pieces that are potentially being looked at, and include those aspects in your letter that your city's right. I think that those are impactful examples of how we are going to be impacted by the tolling piece on 205. I will leave that as it is. Next on the agenda is the 2021 C4 calendar. It's the draft, and it's all based on items and feedback from all y'all over the last couple of months. Was there any thoughts, changes that anyone had that they wanted to suggest?
Thank you, Mayor Hodson. I do see a hand raised, and before we get too far off topic, I'll note that the email that I sent to the entire C4 mailing list today with this letter also included a link for ODOT's page for submitting those comments. But if you have if anybody has a question during the next month and a half, please reach out to Jamie or me. We'll help you get your comments wherever they need to go. Now to this calendar. Again, thank you for the introduction. What you see here on your screen is a list of the agenda topics as prioritized at your July meeting. Sort of did this is a fire, an issue that's on fire for us, or an issue that's not on fire for us, sort of raising your hand, high priority, low priority. And I've created this sort of priorities chart as a tool for us here. And we can move it around. This is just a draft, as you can kind of see up top there. And then from it, I've built a draft calendar. You can see August is already built out. September starts to get a little empty. All the red is stuff that's not filled out yet. What the big feedback that I heard from the July meeting was that there is a very clear interest in having a bigger, robust discussion on how C4 talks about and makes decisions on issues as it relates to applying an equity lens, specifically for housing and transportation. And what the C4 Executive Committee directed as an idea was to use the next few meetings and dedicate at least half the meeting, potentially the entire meeting, to moving that conversation along. They felt that the discussion was bigger than just one meeting, that it could cover multiple topics, and that's all to be decided. We don't have that fleshed out in detail yet. So seeking direction from this group tonight on how they'd like to move forward with that, as well as are these priority lists in the right location. And that's where I think it would be helpful to the executive committee as well as to staff on how we can help you move forward over the next few months. And then with that, I'll take questions, comments, and Martin Myers, I have you up first.
Thank you. Since the executive committee where we set up these high, medium, and low priorities, I had occasion to talk with both Oak Grove and Jennings Lodge about HB 2001, which is now on the low priorities. This HB 2001 is where we're going to add duplex, triplex, and quads into single-family dwelling zoning areas. The state is currently in the process of making rules on this. But what they're mostly concerned about is the deadline that the county faces, June of 2021, to ask for, I'm not going to try on the acronym, but essentially ask for moratorium. And there's not a lot of detail, at least as far as they're aware, on exactly what the parameters of that will look like. In thinking about it, I was thinking that the cities are probably also in the same boat of having to make, being faced with that deadline or a similar deadline. And I was wondering if there's a need or an interest on the part of the various players in making this more of a collective effort between the cities and hopefully between the county also for its unincorporated areas. If there is such a need, then I would suggest that we move that up in priority. Essentially, the message I got was that it's going to take more than the 10 or so months that's left in order to come up with this, to understand what the standards are to test. So I just wanted to put it out there and see if other people are interested in doing that. Thank you.
I am seeing, oh, Mayor Axelrod.
In looking at the calendar and all, and I see we've lost our representatives, unfortunately, but we're working on concepts I think need to be in for thinking of the legislature for next year. I think concepts for bills need to be in, I think September 25 is the date. And I'm just wondering is there any need or interest here to try and, obviously we need to speak to our legislators about this, to try and push for any kind of clarification language on the 217 package in this next session. It is going to be a full session, and if we don't do something by the 25th, do we still have an opportunity to introduce something later, I guess is kind of my question, because perhaps that is something we might want to do.
So Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, there is more opportunity after the 25th. That is more of a guidance date, and it's really a date when you want to get a lot of information in. But I think with COVID this year, there's been a lot of, do your best involved in this. In addition, the R1 Acts letter to the OTC to convene the stakeholder group to figure out this funding solution for the mega projects in the region, and then have a proposal for the legislature for 21. That's going to take longer than them coming up with a solution before the 21st. And so what's likely to happen is if they do come up with a solution by the end of 2020 for the 21 session, whatever their proposal will be is likely going to come out of a committee at the legislature, and they can propose bills into the legislature. The final day to submit a bill in the legislature is going to be mid to late March, maybe even April. And I'm not looking at the calendar or anything. So in general, it's the September date is a please, please, please do it as best as you can. There's certainly always a little bit of flexibility, especially with the bigger sessions.
Okay.
Mayor Knapp and then Mayor Hodson.
Thank you. With regard to the housing question, Wilsonville's got to plan the Frog Pond area that came into the UGB. Postponing the rulemaking or the applicability of the rulemaking is going to mean we're postponing planning that needs to happen. So I'm not at all sure that we would be in favor as a city of delaying that. Yes, it's going to be a bit complicated, but it seems to me it's something that's going to have to be done. And I don't perceive at the state level that there's going to be much interest in delaying that. So I don't know where any other cities are. I have already heard some cynicism at the state people's level that choosing to try to delay it is trying to avoid it, not trying to comply with it. And I think there is kind of a difficult needle to thread there. So I'm not sure if that means we need to be debating and talking about it or what that means exactly.
Thank you. And maybe I can help clarify this point. High, medium, and low priority is on the list of things that you've already agreed are the topics worth talking about for C4. Everything that was not worth the topic for C4 is not on this list. This is what you said, C4 needs to cover in some way. And then this priority discussion was how fast we need to cover it or how soon do we need to approach it and what's urgent versus like what can happen when it needs to happen. So maybe I picked the wrong words in this chart for high priority versus low priority. And that might help provide some clarity in this discussion. Mayor Hodson.
Thanks, Trent. I just wanted to come back to the comments about the House Bill 2001. Is that something that is currently happening, like they're working on that process now? Is that what I understood?
Jamie, are you still on?
Yes, sorry, but I stepped away. Can you repeat the question?
Mayor Hodson was asking where in the process the House Bill 2001 rulemaking process is currently at. And I think you're the one that I know that's closely tracking that.
Absolutely, yes. It is moving along. There is a rulemaking committee meeting on August 18th. Sounds like that will be one of the last meetings. And then they'll be moving toward hearings in September, October, is my understanding. So I also heard yesterday that there was a letter that went in from the League of Oregon Cities that many of your staff may have been helping with. It had some asks around flexibility around the areas of applicability. And I had heard from some of our staff that they were being very responsive to those requests and that there was evolution of the rules as they were written. So I have not yet seen the updated information, but I have heard there has been some evolution of that in a favorable way. So we are waiting to hear what that looks like. But yes, the 18th is the last RAC meeting, to my understanding, and then the hearings will start. There will be public opportunities for testimony and submittal of letters.
Thank you, Jamie, for that. So maybe my question, or maybe there's something we can look at then, is that particular item to see if, for conversation for the exec committee on Monday, to make that an agenda item, at least get an update on that for the September meeting.
We did bring that item to C4 Metro, just so everyone is aware, and I think staff would be prepared to come back in September if you all decide that's what you want to do.
Thank you, Jamie.
Mayor Knapp, I see your hand.
Yes, I think it would be helpful for to be able to discuss the proposed rules once they are out there in time for individual cities to then make comment within the available comment period. So to me, our timing should be adjusted to allow that to happen if it's going to be as helpful as possible.
I don't want to go too far on this, but when I talked with, I can't remember the guy's name who's in charge of the rulemaking, I thought he said last Friday was the date that they were going to have the first set of proposed rules out. I've not seen him though, so I don't know the exact answer to the question. It's a good one though.
Thank you. I mean, I think I have direction on this in terms of an agenda topic. And Martin, if you want to connect with Jamie on that particular detail for clarification, I'm sure I can do an email introduction.
There any other feedback or comments regarding the rest of the layout of the calendar?
Councilor Heisey.
Sorry, I was asleep at my mute. I just, because I mentioned it at the very bitter end of our last meeting, I just wanted to ask, did Executive Committee have the chance to consider whether or not we have some discussion of economic development and an invitation to the county's Economic Development Commission or some other county level body?
So my memory is that came up loosely, and there was some concern about the scope of C4 being specific to transportation and housing. Not that there isn't a nexus, but that it's a very narrow one. Mm-hmm. But certainly that's a discussion if you want to propose it. The executive committee and C4 as a whole can talk about including that into the topics. But that's my memory of where the executive committee landed. It was a very narrow scope.
Sure. Thanks.
One thing that's not on here that's come up in this week actually is a request from the Clackamas County's Emergency Operations Center for the COVID-19 pandemic, sort of requesting a variety of committees and groups that report back to the board, mostly community stakeholders, for a lot of different topics on recovery and reopening planning, and seeking, requesting a desire for involvement as the EOC moves in that direction. And they were curious if C4 would have interest in that as well moving forward. And they're seeking letters of commitment of sorts in that regard. So now is a good time to maybe talk about that, and what sort of a general yes or no consensus can allow me to take this conversation to the executive committee, who sets your agenda, and invite them to future meetings as appropriate and as timely, as it relates, of course, back to the last comment, to C4's scope in the bylaws, which are number one, to coordinate as a broader group, but primarily around transportation and housing / land use issues. Are there any concerns with that proposal, Mayor Knapp?
Yes, there are some concerns with it. We've got so many COVID groups working now that I just don't know how we coordinate an additional COVID group. It does not seem to me to be on point for what we have agreed to in this group, and it seems like we've had pretty full plates, not a shortage of things to talk about. So,
so I actually, as the member representing the fire district, I think it's a good idea. And this is why. I mean, they have a situational awareness of what's going on, and they know, they get intel, and I think it's a good idea to get and include the fire department. Mayor?
So I'll note that this request is coming with the, with the scope of the EOC looking for how to do recovery and reopening planning for COVID-19. It's not necessarily a wholesale, what's happening and what's coordinated, what needs coordination on COVID, more along the lines of how do we start moving back towards, I'll do quotation marks, normal. So if it's in that scope and if it's within the scope of the bylaws, would that be a little bit more agreeable for those who have concerns?
Well, it would be your mayor, Knapp, that's got a concern with it.
well, we're already doing recovery planning with multiple groups, and you can only implement so many plans for a city. You can't be having 4 different recovery plans that you're trying to implement. It just seems to me like it's going to necessitate an awful lot more coordination and discussion and whatnot. The economic development groups are really focused on this, and maybe the fire district could be involved more in Clackamas County Business Alliance, in Portland Business Alliance, in Greater Portland Inc. Economic Development.
Mayor, we only care about people. And so the only thing we care about is people. So hear me out. We're not going to disrail anything. All the people, all the fire districts care about is people. So we want to help people, and all we care about is that. So allow them to be included to help.
Mr. Silva, are you referring to wanting to make sure that the fire districts have an opportunity
Whatever they need
to lean into the EOC? Okay.
Whatever they're asking, their invite to help, I think we should take.
Very good. So I think what I can do then is, I'm having just heard from a couple of you, pick this back to the executive committee again on Monday, let them flesh this out. What I'll do too is let the EOC know, Mr. Silva, that coordination with the fire districts is at least separately an interest. And then for C4, note, we can talk about it with the executive committee, what we've heard here today. A lot of head nods in both directions I've observed, but not necessarily dramatic opposition or support in other directions on this particular topic.
No, and I like Mr. Knapp, the mayor, but we should work together to find a solution.
Seems to me a little bit, it's more of a communication kind of item and just to be sure that things are integrated in everybody's plans, but not so much as sort of an agenda item for us in that regard. So,
right.
I do imagine them bringing
up. I agree with Mayor Knapp. We do have a lot of other stuff going on, and there's already other elements addressing these, but certainly coordination and collaboration is a good thing.
Yes.
So I'm going to jump in here, Trent. And Matthew, thank you. I appreciate that. And Mayor Knapp and Mayor Axelrod, your comments as well. So let's flush this out on Monday during the exec session and see what we can either figure out, piece together, and figure out where we can go from there, and take this where we need it to go. Okay.
Thank you very much. I have that direction.
Moving into updates and other business, is there anything JPAC wise? JPAC impact, anyone?
I don't believe there's much, anything that we're aware of going on. Mayor Knapp, do you?
Okay. R1 Act update, I'll just say this. We did the letter. There was quite a bit on tolling, and then the state transportation improvement projects. So STIP is coming back around for the next wave. And it was very bleak in terms of the conversation in terms of funds that will be available. That's pretty much that initial conversation in a nutshell. So it was a meeting to set the bar low for STIP projects in the next wave. So we will be gearing up, I'm sure, in this group to don the gloves and duke it out on the project list here down the road. Anyone else want to chime in from the R1 Act that was there, Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, well, you kind of touched on it, Mayor, and I just kind of make it maybe more direct as far as impacts to all of us, is that they did the revenue forecasting and it doesn't look very good. And what that really might mean for that next session is that there might be just less money available for STIP for grants. So that affects us all.
I'm going to skip other business, and before we adjourn, I just want to kind of let this group know, in case you haven't been watching a calendar, we have entered our sixth month of pandemic, and I don't know about you, but I'm seeing much of my community and my neighbors, things starting to get kind of fuzzy. A little bit of, if you're familiar as a kid, you used to ride down a hill and you'd get speed wobble on your bike, and not sure how to kind of handle it, but I think we're seeing people start to get that. I think the isolation and depression are starting to set in on a lot of people. So do the things you need to do for your own mental health to stay focused. There's a lot of information. We're constantly, if you're working at home, you really don't turn off the computer because you'd end up working all the time. But find the ways to do that. Check in on a neighbor, find a loved one, make sure they're doing okay. All right. There's a lot going on, and I appreciate all of you chipping in. And I'm sure some of you are like me, cramming for this meeting at the last minute just because life is what it is. But I appreciate all of you, and I want you to have a safe August. Enjoy last bits of summer. Those of you with kids and grandkids, brace for an interesting start to a school year and what that's going to mean. Take it in stride, breathe deep, and find your happy place as much as you can. So, Trent, anything else for the group?
Always good to be with you at almost 9 o'clock on C4 nights. I always appreciate it. Great discussion tonight. I know there was a lot to discuss, which is why we thought this was an appropriate topic for tonight. We knew it was going to be big, and we know it's a dynamic discussion. So thanks for your patience, your clarification, a lot of direction, great coordination. I think staff and a lot of our departments have excellent foundation based on your comments to move forward and support all of our communities here in C4 and as the Clackamas family in general. Thanks.
All right, everyone. We are adjourned. Have a great month, and see everyone in September.